Welcome back. Oh,
Go on.
welcome back to the Dope Stroke podcast. I'm trying to do the intro, but Trotty is interrupting me because he's just eager to get on the mic. But you'll have your say in a moment. Welcome back to the podcast. The trio is here as always. Myself, Chris Ryan, Dazzler, Daryl Evans, and then Chris Trott. And we are recording this around about an hour after Rory McIlroy has just secured the Players for 2025. Second time he's won it in that dramatic 3-hole playoff. We're going to get to that, and then we're also going to dive into a little bit of actually what happens at these big events on the tour trucks, because I'm on this podcast with two people who've got an inside knowledge of that. Both Daryl and Trotty have worked on the TaylorMade tour van. They know what happens. I want to get some inside stories and some scoops on the behind the scenes stuff when these players are looking at changing golf clubs. But let's first talk about the Players. Did you watch it?
Yes.
Good. Let's move on.
As answers I can give you.
I saw as much of it as I could. I mean, obviously for me, it's a little different time zone. I always think if you're watching it in Europe, it's fantastic. You get to watch all this stuff at the end of the day, especially when it's Florida time zone. So for me, obviously with life carrying on, I had stuff going on at the weekend. I've bounced around and seen as much as I can. But the truth is, like, that stadium course, what a venue to hold a tournament. It's amazing. The way the PGA Tour has changed that tournament a bit, because I know we're going to talk about equipment and trucks and access. They've tried to make it a bit more exclusive for the tour reps that work there. Now you have to wear additional accreditation when you go on the range that allows individuals on. So at Augusta, basically, you can go on the range if invited by a player, and you have to have a certain credential that gives you certain sections on that range to keep it at the point where the viewer, the patron, can see everything that's going on. Players has tried to go a little bit that way. Personally, I don't like it because I think the range is so big at the Players that you don't need to do it. And we're talking here as we get to a stadium golf course. I don't know if you've been there, Bubsy, but the actual driving range is so good. I mean, you've got flat for a start. It's Florida. Everything's flat. Then you have greens out that you hit towards. There's a fitting studio that's kind of shut off on the right with like facilities to get food and stuff. The trucks are a bit of a trek past another chipping green and another golf course. The clubhouse is far left. There's two sections for different wind directions, then the official chipping green. And then if you want private and the other wind direction, you go literally 380 the other end and hit the other way. But if you hit from the main end, the greens have like these little boards, pieces of wood that hold them up. So everything is defined. So when you're setting your mind as a player to hit and visualize the golf shot, it really stands out on a flat driving range. It's one of the best ranges of the year for sure. The turf is great. Florida temperature's great. Then the golf course itself is just immaculate. Tight, really tight and intimidating off the tee with big misses. If you miss left on a few holes, heavy penalties, like feels like you're playing a bit in Asia. The trees overhang. It's got that humidity. And of course, as the golfers say, you go around thinking about 17 the whole day. And I know we saw that for those that have, I mean, I'm assuming this is going out. Everyone will be aware that Rory won, which we've already said. But the playoff hole, you get some breeze on that. It's quite exposed. Wedges can easily miss greens. And we're talking about the best players in the world here. But I did feel for JJ Sport. I mean, he's a California guy. He's always been quite quiet around me. I guess, obviously, funky accent. But I felt for him because his golf game has gone from being, and I think this is fair to say, like someone who's new to the tour to compete for that tournament with maybe a juggernaut in the game right now, arguably the best player in the game right now. He's run twice this year already, won at Pebble Beach in tough conditions, changed the TP5 ball, gone to another tough golf course where you've got to control your ball flight, won there. I know there's been controversy with him throwing the fan out, which I want to talk about that if we can get into it. But, mate, he's making some big decisions, making some big equipment decisions, and he's committed to it. And I think that's a good thing for a player. It's obviously not great if you're, wanting new clubs in the play and whatnot, and we should just leave that there. But at the end of the day, he's making some big, top-quality player decisions. A lot of respect for what he's doing right now.
That's good. I think The reason why JJ Spawn probably is quiet around you is because he probably can't really get a word in edgeways, to be fair. So I just want to address that little elephant in the room because we know what that's really like. And continuing on, before I can see that you're trying to butt in, Trotmeister, I thought the playoff today was actually pretty good. And that shot, and I know we're going to talk about that shot on 17, and I'm talking about Spawn's shot. He hit, I think, what he thought was a really good shot. He stood on the tee, looked like it was cutting back towards the pin. The pin was cut on the right-hand side of the green. It was following a very similar line to McIlroy. McIlroy teed off first on that hole, having won the previous hole. And he just carried the green. But it looked good. He was surprised that he carried the green. And obviously that unraveled everything then, and he was quickly 3 over, and there was really no coming back after that. But there's no question to even get in the playoff, hell of a thing to do. And Rory McIlroy, from all the golf that I saw over the last few days, there's no question he managed his game really well. He was conservative when he had to be conservative. He was aggressive when he had to be aggressive. Is this the sort of Rory McIlroy that goes on to potentially break that I don't want to call it a major duck. He's already won a bunch. But is this the year that he can go ahead and compete again and contend and win? Maybe. But you'll have to play this sort of approach again.
I think that's a great question, and he's obviously doing everything right because he's never won twice before the Masters before on the PGA Tour. But I just want to ask both of you your thoughts on this because I watched the playoff. I was kind of keen to watch it, and on the Sky Sports coverage, they were showing you the yardage he had and how far it was playing based on the wind. So on 16, Rory had something like a shot that was playing 160 yards. And he's hit a hard wedge, like 160 yards wedge. Then on 17, it was playing 140 yards. So it was playing 20 yards less. And he's hit a 9-iron. Now, Rory's an incredible shot maker. He's gone down the handle. He's hit a 9-iron. So those two yardages don't really compare. You think he's hit a wedge from 160 and then a 9-iron from effectively 140. And on the coverage, JJ Spawn, you can see him looking in his bag. He's seen that he's hit 9. He's gone for 8 and airmailed the green. Now, my question is, should you just play your own game in that situation? Or do you want to be taking advice? Because I feel like, take Rory out of the equation. If he'd have gone first, he might have hit 9. But has he been influenced there by Rory and thinking, well, if Rory's at 9, I've got to hit 8?
So Rory birdied 16, right? To go 1 up.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, Bubsy, that green with where that flag location is, he had so much room short. He obviously was worried about it stalling into the breeze. And I actually think I'm gonna say that I think as soon as he hit it, Darryl, he knew it was long. I know I've seen the reaction on social media, but the reason I'm saying that is based on having been with these characters so much and watching them hit iron after iron. And I know you did, albeit a long time ago. But launch monitor, like even Brooke Henderson, the recent video I put out on my channel, she's calling it she called on the number twice on a Know Your Yardage. And I know that me and Bubsy did a little challenge that's coming on that. It's really hard to do. Really hard. I'm not going to say what I got, Bubsy, because I don't know if you've made your video to combat mine yet, but it's hard to do, especially if there's a bit of breeze, temperature changes the golf ball. And I do think, so I did some stuff here. Actually, Bubsy, it'd be good to get your opinion. Game's a bit rusty, trying to get back to playing a lot more, realizing even at a club level, like, you have to play what it feels. And I've been reading a bit of that Peltz Short Game Bible, classic book from like the 90s. And Peltz talks about 7:30 backswing, 9 o'clock backswing. Those of you watching here, it's your left arm going to 9 o'clock on a clock face with the top of your head being 12 and the ball strike point being 6 on the clock. So you make your backswing and then you create these yardages for the wedges. Once you do 7:30, you then get out on the golf course and you might hit a lob wedge. I think mine's like 35 yards on a 7:30 backswing and a 56 might go 45 yards in the air. You then get the shot. It's very hard to play clock face for short yardages when you grew up playing feel for short yardages. So I think Rory must be tapping back to some of his youth there to hit shots from Northern Ireland in that wind direction. Now, JJ, has he got sucked into hitting one more? It feels like an 8-iron for 140 for that level of player. That time of day, I can't see the breeze being up that much. I know it was, but it's early in the morning. I think he has been influenced by what's going on. And I think the concern is you've got one of the best players in the world who's piped it in close after making birdie, got momentum. You feel like you've got to make something work. You don't trust Rory to miss right on 18. He's definitely not missing left. And the real play is find the centre of the green, 2-stab, move on. Maybe make that Keimer putt across the ridge there, across the trap. But look, again, we're talking about experience, someone who's been in that situation many, many times and comparing it to JJ Spawn. If you say to JJ Spawn, in your heart of hearts, would you take losing in a playoff on a Monday morning to Rory McIlroy at the Players? I think he'd probably say yeah. I don't know, but I think he'd probably say yeah.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. It's a hard one to really know because we obviously weren't on the tee with those guys. But I don't think that Rory McIlroy would have intentionally tried to trick or fool Spawn on the tee. I think he would have played the shot that he would have felt had the best chance of success because he's got all the experience by being in the playoff. And it reminds me a little bit where I grew up. I grew up in South Africa, just on the outskirts of Johannesburg. There's a golf course there, Roodepoort Country Club, and it was a Gary Player design course. And Gary Player would sometimes go there and have a game every now and then. Anyway, this one time that he was playing with a couple of the other members, and there's a few people following him. And there's a par 3 on the back 9. It's about maybe like 150 yards. He's hit a 7-iron or an 8-iron to the green. Let's call it a 7-iron to the green. And this guy has then said, geez, is it a 7-iron? I could get there with a 9-iron. And then Gary Player then has gone 4-iron, 5-iron, 6-iron, 7-iron, 8-iron, 9-iron, pitching wedge all on the green, just to prove a point that it's about the shot that's required for what's in front of you at that time. So I think when you see the players with different yardages using different golf clubs, versus what you think, because everyone goes, oh, my stock yardage is this for that yardage. But actually it should, which is to the point that I'm hearing off both of you guys anyway, it's the shot you face. That's the one that matters. And
McGee, that's a great comment. And I just want to dive in here. Yeah, there's 2 other co-hosts on here. It's difficult for me, so I can't hold my tongue any longer. There's a level of golfer. There's a level of golfer that is beyond the level that I reached when I was a decent player. And in America, that level, I think, the wind play is great in Europe, but the understanding of how greens can change so much here based on the rain and the stimp. There's a lot more slopes in the greens because they can maintain the greens in certain parts of the country to a higher standard than the UK because you're not battered by the weather. You go and play Bandon, which is what this is, Old Mac up in Bandon. The greens aren't as quick because it's more like UK weather. It's exposed to bad weather. You come down here, you go to Florida, the greens can have so much more undulation and speed, which then needs you to control the flight on your wedges more, which is why hitting 8-iron from 140, it was maybe too much back, but it doesn't surprise me because, again, play with guys now, they're a little older, they had careers on the PGA Tour, made fortunes, very successful golfers. They'll hit 7-iron sometimes, 135, just to take the spin off. Like I spun a ball at the weekend, just playing the other day.
Ooh, spun it, did you?
What a cock. 130 to the back edge, spun it into the front. You know what I mean? You've got to take the spin.
This is a podcast, mate, not your chance to flex.
I get too much spin, actually.
Oh, do you know?
I
got some spin friends, have you?
What's this red button do here, you pair of pricks? Let's move on to something else. Can't be asked.
I just quickly, I want to touch on this. I want to,
that's
I
the
want to
best
have a
bit of banter he's had on this in flipping 2 episodes, 2 series. Is the best bit of banter he's come out with. No, just a quick one. Let's just not over. It's the best bit of banter he's had in 2 series of podcasts.
I don't know how much
Welcome
of it.
To the Dope Stroke podcast, Chris. Lovely to see you.
Right. Good to be here. I watched a little bit of the players, mainly because it's obviously an incredible tournament. The field was strong. There was a situation, I don't know if you saw it, with JJ Spawn on, I don't know what day it was, weekend at some point. He's hit it on the 9th, second shot into the rough. And he's like 6 paces in the rough. And I'm talking like it's thick, it's gnarly, it's long, can't see the ball. But he's stood on a sprinkler head. So he's taken a drop from that sprinkler head closer to the fairway, but still in the rough. He's dropped it. So free drop. Then he stood on another sprinkler head. So he's then taken another drop from the rough, and that drop has got him onto the fairway. And then he's gone from the fairway, perfect lie, spun it. Now, 2 things. He's done nothing wrong there. He's played within the rules. and everyone else in that field should have been doing the same thing had they given that opportunity. But when it's a free drop, should you be able to drop it from the thick rough onto the fairway? Just doesn't seem right to me.
We get spin friends.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm all for it. Spin friend. Me
I
and
suppose
Jay
you ask.
spin friends.
Yeah, and if that was you, you'd be like, Rory, run up to the green, tell me if it spins.
You know, you were doing that as a junior.
100% with El Pilates. Dazzler, should you be able to drop it from the rough? If it's a penalty, if you're paying for it, fair enough. But a free drop from a gnarly lie onto the fairway, like he's done nothing wrong, but the rule needs to change.
Well, maybe the rule does need to change. Trotty will know the story about Sevi when he hit his shot next to a grandstand. You know this one, Bubs?
Maybe.
He hit it next to, I can't remember the tournament. It was obviously years ago, donkeys years ago, and he hit it next to a grandstand. And he went up to the ball, called the rules official over, and he said, look, I can't play this shot. And the rules official was looking at us thinking, why can't you play the shot? And he said, because this requires me to stand in a left-handed position in order to turn the club around so I can actually make a strike against the golf ball. And the ref was like, okay, I guess you're going to have to drop then. So then he dropped like a couple of yards away from the corner of the grandstand, and he was able to then stand right-handed again and chip it onto the green. And the referee just stopped him and said, oh, hang on a second. You said it required a left-handed shot. He said, yeah, it did when the ball was there, but now it requires a right-handed shot and I'm ready to play. And then he got away with the rules of golf just because of that. So I think understanding the rules, and the best players that understand the rules can obviously take the best advantage of that. But is that a rule that should change? I think so. If you've hit in the rough, you should stay in the rough.
Well, I think so. I think there should be some rule where you can take relief from the sprinkler, and I don't know how you'd have to write the rule, but I just don't feel like you should be able to drop from super thick rough onto the fairway for free.
Yeah, I think that's fair, to be honest. I can't argue with that at all. No.
It's the rules, boys. There are certain things that are the freaking rules.
Should we talk about your rule?
You knew the rule.
What about you knew the rule? Yeah, let's talk about that, Troy. Let's talk about your drop on that green in the 2005 Midland Masters or whatever tournament that was that I was carrying the bag for you.
The fact that this story still lives on
to this day
shows how annoying it was. Anyways, I mean, do we really want to get into my?
Yeah,
how can we go from the players to talking about that? So basically, you must have heard this story, Bubs, but long story as short as we can make it. I end up in a situation where hit a second shot into hole 10 at Cold Ashby. Remember that place?
Yeah, I know it.
Going along okay, doing well in the order of merit, whatever. Fly the green and basically about 30 feet away from the flag, but I'm on the fringe in a drainage. But I mean, we're playing like PGA assistant stuff or PGA region, and it's in a stones that hadn't been covered up that were covering a drainage pipe. So I pick up the ball, obviously ball in hand, you get a drop. I drop the ball and it rolls off the fringe, not closer to the hole, but on the green. So I'm like, is that okay? I don't know, is it good? We good? And one guy says, yeah, you're good. Other guy doesn't say anything. I'm like, fair enough. I putt up, make par, we move on to the next. A hole and a half later, a rules official comes out and says, hey, Trotty, listen, mate, we've had, just so you know, we've had someone report a ruling about what's gone off. So I look at Daryl, he's caddying for me. I'm like, well, it ain't him. I look at the other boy who said you're golden. I'm like, it ain't him. I look at the caddy of the other lad. I'm thinking, it ain't him. And then I look at this kid who remained unnamed, much taller than me and skinny.
You've got to name him.
I'm like, it's him. It's him. So we carry on, and the next hole that we play is a par 3, and it's talking about spin friends. This one requires a shot of like a 9-iron or something into the green, and you don't want to spin it too much. And I'm in between clubs, and I'm stood over the golf ball, and I turn, and bear in mind, Daryl and I aren't the most intimidating of people. Daryl knows I'm pissed off. And I'm over the ball and I step off it and I go, Daryl, I don't know if it's a 9 or a wedge. And Daryl's like, yeah, just a little 9 in there, it won't spin, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah. And I get it and I can't get it out of my head. And I turn and look at this guy and I went, you knew the rule, didn't you? Daryl goes, Trotty. And I went, you knew the rule, didn't you?
Remember what he did next?
He stood behind his caddy, didn't he? He went and got scared, stood behind. And Daryl's like, mate. And I went, you knew the rule, didn't you? I went, Daryl, give me the wedge. And then I hit the wedge. It lands on the green, spins off the front. We walk down the next. The rules official comes over. I went, yeah, I know. I'm fucking done. I'm done. I'm out this tournament. I'm out the Order of Merit. I can't get into Wentworth now because we were playing to try and get into the PGA at Wentworth. I was in the listing and I went up to this guy, shook his hand, and I went, thanks for just fucking everything. Really appreciate that. Enjoy yourself. And the irony of the story is that another 2 holes later, the guy playing with us, the third guy, was a really nice guy. He's a bit older than us at the time. The irony of the story goes is that this guy had already reported his other playing partner in the 36th hole break for signing for the wrong scorecard. When he signed his score and he said, you'd shot like 74, but he'd actually shot 75, something like that. And they both agreed, both signed. He said, no problem. And then after he'd signed it, he goes, he signed for the wrong score there. And then he got DQ'd as well. So this fella finished the game of golf with no playing partners because we'd all been DQ'd.
Right, we'll put that up on Instagram and we'll tag him. You can tell Lloyd who it is. We'll tag him.
You can say who his mate is. He was big.
Tim Stevens is who he was.
Yeah, Tim Stevens.
Lived with me forever. Skinny bloke. Tim Stevens. Pissed me off like you wouldn't believe. Mate, if that hadn't have happened that day, life could have been better. I might not even have been sat here. I could have won Wentworth. Who knows?
Right. Just before we move on, Lloyd, can we get Tim Stevens on the podcast, please?
he's a spin friend of mine.
Right, so we've just been talking about rules. So, Dazzler, I want to ask you this. Tour van, TaylorMade tour van. Players go on there. They see it as a bit of an escape from the cameras and that kind of stuff. Is there a bit of an unwritten rule that what happens on these tour vans stays on the tour vans?
Well, maybe. I mean, there's definitely certain stuff that stays on the tour trucks. Obviously, some players are pretty protective over their data and all that kind of stuff in terms of the specs of their clubs and things. In terms of the banter and the stories, kind of, I would say most things go. But it's like a little traveling circus, and Troy will attest to that. It literally is. So you know everybody that's out there all the time, and you just move from one location to the next. So the stories just get shared amongst the circus all the time, and very occasionally then spill out more into the public domain. And there's a lot of good stories from the tour. But is it an unwritten rule? I don't know. Maybe for some, maybe for others, not so much.
Some of the stories obviously are. I mean, obviously you go back to prior social media and just some of the stuff that used to go on and more the characters on the trucks and like the original crew that drove those trucks, certainly around Europe when it was maps and it wasn't iPhones. Mate, some of the stuff those guys would get up to was just insane. And then obviously some of the caddies, insane. And the players back in the day. And, for me, I was thinking about this when we said we were going to do the podcast, and if it is a flex, I don't give a shit. You can do me for it. But I've worked with Weiskopf, Watson, Woosnam, Langer, Faldo, Alathabal. Then I've gone through to the prior year in between, the Garcias of this world, the Luke Donalds, Keimer, Rosie, Casey. Then I've gone into the modern day stuff, like the Brysons, the Brooks, the Tigers, the Rorys. And I've seen it change so much. And now, social media is a big thing. Obviously, the trucks are now set up differently. When they were raw, it was cool. Certainly, the early days in Europe were a lot of fun. I worked in Japan, Korea, Asia, Australia, all those different sort of workshop situations, different clubs required for different parts of the world, different clubs required for different types of player. Good players not coming near the truck, bad players living on the truck, insecure players changing stuff all the time. And then just the pressures of doing it and launch monitors coming in and that changing who was really strong and had a real deep golf knowledge to who maybe didn't and would drift into a different role on the trucks. Then Adidas owning TaylorMade and the pressures that brought to private equity owning TaylorMade and what that meant. And I alluded to it earlier. Then the pressures on players. I mean, Rory, the pressure he gets to be in the new equipment and the job on tour and what that truly entails now of you have to get the best players in the best equipment. That is what you have. That's what your sole purpose of doing it is. And, that's what brought me, which I'm sure everyone wants a soundbite of it, but the Tiger Woods, the stuff I got to work with him was all based around that Ardmore TaylorMade putter. It was a few years ago, but that was really my first introduction to getting to actually do stuff with him. Obviously, since then, I've done a couple of podcasts or one podcast, done multiple stuff and content, but the detail that he would go to on the putter to make sure that that thing was right, that was not an easy club to get in the bag. And there was a group of us that worked on that, and I was one of them, and obviously had that Cameron of his in my hand at one point, and he wanted that lie angle changed. And I'd be lying to you if I wasn't standing over the loft and lie machine with that putter in it thinking, if I break this, which is highly unlikely, but if I do break this, how am I going to have that conversation? Like, what am I going to say? And that's not a good thought. The chances of doing it, you've got to have lead for hands to do that. You've got to be an idiot. But you'd
be more famous.
It went through my mind, mate. It went through my mind like this could be the end or it could be the making. I don't know how you recover. But for me, obviously, like with him, I think I'm in a good spot. I mean, we're not best mates, but it's someone that I got so much respect for the guy. I mean, he's a legend. He's a legend. And his information, even if he gives you little snippets, is freaking awesome. So good. If you like golf, it's so good.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, how do you really follow up on that? Like, Trotty's been out on tour for what is it now, 20 plus years. I had a stint for a few years with TaylorMade across the European tour. Got managed to travel the world and see a bunch of great golf, if I'm honest with you. And I tell you what, I did find that was quite consistent about working on that side of the ropes. And again, Trotty will be able to validate further. But the very best players in the world, they don't tinker. They new product comes out, they'll test it thoroughly. And sometimes a thorough test could be as long as a couple of minutes, and it could go on for maybe 6 or 7 weeks. But the reality is, once a decision is made and once the trigger is pulled, that's it. There's no going back. And they will stick with that for the rest of the year. Whereas, I remember we would have several players that'll come onto the TaylorMade Tour Truck week in, week out, because they couldn't quite get the hybrid right, or, the grind on the wedges wasn't quite there, or, the weight wasn't spot on in the drive, or whatever it might be. And those are the guys that tended to miss the cards. They were almost searchers. They were looking for something. Whereas the very best players, they weren't looking for anything. They just wanted to have control. And making a decision was part of them having control. Whereas if they were filled with doubt, that was normally a missed cut. Whereas the certainty, and I see that with the very best guys, and alluding to the point earlier with Rory McIlroy and his decision making right now, and how he's going around the golf course and how he's playing his game. He is making very strategic decisions, but he's very committed to making them.
It takes a lot to do that, Daryl. Like, if you think about the pressures on him to be able to stand there and say, this is what I'm going to do, and I don't care, because this is what... Even the Morikawa stuff, mate, in the press, when he's standing there going like, I don't think he's handled it great from what I've seen, but he's like walked off at Arnold Palmer, and he's like, I don't have to do this. Now, look, pick your audience, pick your tournament. Obviously, Mr. Palmer would have expected everything, and I hope the older me 100% agrees, but that knowing, and I'm not their level, but knowing what it takes, as you're trying to allude to be there, I understand it, which again, moving back to Tiger and the ability he has he always engages when he needs to be fair to him. If he's got to say something about the golf tournament, he'll do it. It's freaking awesome.
So I've got a couple of questions for both of you. I'm guessing a little bit more for Trotty, because probably has worked with slightly higher caliber player, but I know, Daryl, you work with some of the best in Europe. So when you work for someone like TaylorMade, I'll just use Sergio as an example. He's playing TaylorMade clubs. You're working for TaylorMade. I'm guessing you just can't rock up to Sergio and start working with him. So how does that happen? Is it a case of you have to sort of almost like get within his circle for 2, 3, maybe even 6 months? He starts to learn a little bit about you, and it's a long process before you're able to have a say on his golf clubs? Or are these players just appreciative that because you've been handpicked by TaylorMade, you do have the knowledge and they're quite trusting straight away? Or is it a case of building that over a period of time?
No, yeah, 100. It's a great question. So you start, and Garcia we'll get to, but to back end into this a little bit, someone once explained working on the tour to me a bit like being at school, at senior school in the UK and high school here in the States. And I think you're kind of right. And the more time you do, you go up in the years. And by the time when you're in the top year and you're a prefect or whatever the school labels you as, you know everybody. Like I remember in Europe at the end of my time there, I couldn't walk 5 yards at Wentworth without someone stopping me either for a chat or to talk about golf clubs or just to talk about anything. It was crazy. And that would be everyone from media to agents to people who did insurance for players, people who ran tournaments, people that were playing in the tournament, caddies. So you build up your time and you start by working with the guys who are on the cut line. That's what you start. Your qualifiers, your locals, and your cut line. And once you have success with them, you start to then get validated by others. And of course, you at this point usually are pretty young. I'm the same age as Martin Keimer. And I've told this story before on various podcasts, not ours, but I basically came out. Keimer came over from Titleist or Ping Driver to us. And I was his age. So we were very connected in terms of interests. We would go-kart a little bit. We would, to a kid from England and a kid from Germany, we got on pretty well. And I really liked golf. And obviously he was one of the best in the world coming up and through. So when I got the driver in for the PGA that he won there at, I want to say Whistling Straits. I might have got that wrong. Lloyd will have to Google that. For the one that he won, we were in Wisconsin. And that really was the breakthrough club for me. Obviously, Justin Rose, maybe a year or two older. I was close with him. Next thing you know, you're working with Rosie and Keimer. Other players are seeing it. Tongchai Jaidi was coming out. I worked a lot with him. I obviously moved to Asia in among all of this, but Jaidi is the figurehead in Asia. All of a sudden, then you get Kiradek. You get every Asian wanting to work with you. Then the Aussies see it. Then all of a sudden, you get every Aussie. Then the Americans see you at the Open. They see you at... Then all of a sudden, you get every American. Now, with Garcia, to come back into this, Garcia was playing both tours at the start. So he would be receiving product from the US. And then from there, it would be left for us as Europeans to pick it up. And as time went on and he saw me more and more, there was an element of trust. Then you get validated by the top guy in America at the time, a guy called Keith Sabarbaro, mate of mine, was my boss at the end. And Keith would just be like, look, Trotty will handle it. Go see Trotty. He's there. He's here. He'll help you out. Check with him. Then I became very good on the launch monitor, which really validated me again because I'd played a little bit as a kid. And basically now I could tell you anything you wanted to know about a launch monitor, to the point where TrackMan certified me anyway without doing any of their qualifications because I was using the thing week in, week out. And I think once players see that, and, you know, we were driver wars when I was there, which means we wanted number one driver on tour. So I'll be on the launch monitor dawn till dusk. It was bonkers. So I think there was an element like you were the TaylorMade guy. You were there every week. You were, without fail, keeping it together, even in the party towns. You were taking this seriously. I mean, I got to a point with a lot of players. I'd look at their schedule. Where are you going? What do you need? When stats came in a lot more, I got close to the stat guys. I'd be like, right, I know that you're going to play this qualifier for the Open Championship. I had played almost every single links course in the UK pretty much. This golf course, you hit your clubs this far. This par 5 off the back tees into this wind direction is going to be tough for you to get there, which means you could plug in this front trap. The front trap will have more sand in it because I know the course as well. You're going to need a sand iron that's going to be able to do this, this, and this. I mean, I remember I had that conversation with Andrew Coulthard when he was in the twilight of his career, and he's like, Jesus Christ. And then I sent him wedges prior to him going the qualifier. He qualifies for the Open. He turns up, what do I need for here? Yeah, no worries, I played it. This is how far you hit it. You're going to need this, this, and that. Cool. I mean, that level of trust, and that's what people don't see. And I think now, like, there's so much information. We talk about clipped, but ShotLink on the tour gives you everything. Keith Mitchell won on a PGA Tour Honda. The only reason I got that in is because I followed his stats for a while. And I went to speak to Keith in Boston before he won the Honda a few years back. And it might not be a name that resonates with everyone. Kashmir Keith, they call him. Lovely fella, but got a bit of a front to him, like he's a competitor. And he literally said to me, like, why do you come to me every insert the F word week with a putter? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm not doing great. You're annoying. Like, what the fuck? And I was like, because I've seen this, and this, and I think you putt like shit. I said, and I don't care if you tell me to fuck off, because I've had bigger names than you tell me to fuck off. So the bottom line is, mate, play the putter, and I think I can help you because I've got the stats from Dustin at certain distances, which you're weak at, and Dustin got better. So if he can get better, I think you can too. I said, at the end of the day, I don't give a shit if you play it or not. I said, but it's my job, and I'm not going to leave coming up to you every single week. And that's where you had to be at in the end, literally saying to people, a bit like, no one will flipping know this name, but Brian Clough. You know, I'm sure Clough at the end was like, this is the way you're going to set up, boys. It is what it is. Get on with it. See you later. And that's kind of the way I did. Now, that was my style. And I think Daryl can allude to people on tour have different styles. But I've upset a few players. But obviously, as time goes on and you've worked with Garcia, the names, you've worked with them all. You get Wolfie coming out, Morikawa coming out. It's the new guys. It's like, it is what it is, boys. I've seen it all before. I mean, Colin is basically Rosie. He just is. They're very similar. And I think that's why you see them get on when they play TGL together. They're very similar. And Fleetwood's a little bit like Keimer, to be fair. So you can find comparisons between everyone. I think a quick one, Brooks Koepka and the driver that he got at Bellerive. There was a crack in that when he won that PGA against Tiger. There was a crack on the Wednesday morning. He was a unique one. I mean, he hit 3 balls with the new driver and was like, yeah, it's good. And he is very committed to decisions, like very decisive. And I think that's why he's so good. But it's interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, I do think, getting into that role. I mean, I remember some of the new guys that would come into the team. I would always tell them, look, be patient because it's going to take you at least a year before you even feel like you're reasonably good at this job. It's just going to take a long time because you got to get to know a lot of people and you got to get to know them to a really good level that you can walk up to them without anybody feeling uncomfortable about it. So, I do think that that's a big part. I also think it's probably worth the listeners of this understanding how the tour trucks actually work, because for us out here in Europe, and it's similar across the world, really, there's 2 halves to the team. So one half, there'll be the technicians and the club builders that work on the truck, and then you then get the reps or the fitters that are out actually on the range working with the players. So they are the ones that are making the decisions with the player to determine what adjustments, what requirements need to take place in order to build, adjust, or spec a club, whatever the case may be. You then go back out onto the truck. If it's minor adjustments, you tend to make those yourselves. If it's the reps will make them themselves. But if it's an out-and-out club build or an iron build or whatever it might be, then the technicians are there to help build that in good time so that you can get back out on the range and do some testing with that same player or other players that might be waiting for you. So I do think, when you also have a brand that's quite in demand, week in, week out, a lot of players on invites for that tournament, they come up onto the truck. So, all of those kind of things make quite an impact for people who are, new onto the tour, trying to find their feet, possibly even making the odd mistake here and there. You hate to say it, but it does happen occasionally because that's the whole point, right? You got to test these things. You got to see what helps the player and what doesn't. I remember a time, I think I was working with Bradley Dredge, and we were fiddling around with this fairway wood, but he kept cutting the fairway wood, and as in hitting it left to right. And I was like, no matter what we did to this club, it would just not stop doing that. So I then thought, you know what, I'm going to try something way out of left field. I've never done this before, but I'm going to give it a go. So I went back onto the truck and I flattened the fairway wood. And usually by flattening something like that, the ball should go even further right. But the lesson that we learned was by doing that, we actually lowered the CG location because now the club head was, it was just getting lower to the ground, which meant that he ended up striking it better. And that strike alone made the ball move with a better shape for him. And, I wouldn't have been prepared to do that, how we've basically run out of all options. But that's the kind of level you've pretty much got to go to with these guys to try and determine what's actually going to help them. And Troy's got thousands more stories than I do working with some of these best players. But then equally, I know there's a bit of talk here about the US Open that at the USPGA that Keimer won. Well, I know in the build up to that, he won a number 2 course at Pinehurst. We were working at Wentworth earlier in the year, and he needed a 2-iron. But at the time, in that particular model of iron that he was playing, I can't remember which iron it was now, we didn't make a 2-iron. So we had to double bend a 3-iron and make a 2-iron out of, that's just what we had to do. Anyway, I ran the golf club out to him on the golf course. He hit it maybe 2 or 3 times on one of the tees, and then he took it to the tournament, the major at Pinehurst, and he won. And I just think that was a short fit. Didn't take me long to do at all. But then other guys took like 3 months to get a driver in the bag. And I think you build up a level of experience, and you build up a level of tolerance of understanding how far you can stretch something so that you can help the player. Because everything was about helping the player all the time. Right. But you had to be prepared to kind of do some really funky things and paint stripes on golf clubs. And I know Trotty used to chip away the paint on the club face to make it look more curved, to help players release the club better. We've had Sharpies down golf shafts to try and make them appear longer than they really are. Because you didn't really want to upset the balance of the club. You just wanted to get performance out of it. And no matter what it took, that was the length you had to go to, and that only comes with experience. So if you're an amateur fitter and you're out onto the range for the first time at a tour event, you're not going to give it the old lie board scenario and try and get the best out of the lie board. It just doesn't work that way. It's like not every player is going to require a 2-hour fitting, which is kind of like the standard in the retail space. Mikko Ilinen, I remember when the SLDR driver came out, we only had like 6 at the Scottish Open that year. I went out to see him in his spec, and I said, look, new driver, give us a test, see what you think. He hit 2 shots, and he said, yep, perfect, that's in the bag. And he played with it for the rest of the summer. That's how it goes,
I think, listening to Trotty speak there about, the length that he went to in his role, and I know you would have done the same, Daryl. I think from the outside looking in, you kind of think you maybe go on the range, look at some data, change the loft, put them in a driver, and that's it. But it's so much more than that. And I don't think people quite realise how close you are to the players and how entrenched you are in what they do. I remember going to the Irish Open at, is it Lachinch? Is that there? Yeah. I remember going over there, and I was there in the practice days. I think it was Adrian, who was still working in Europe at the time, Adrian Rietveld, and he'd just been on the course with John Rahm, walking on the course, and he put a new club in the bag. I don't know what it was. And he came off, and he was telling me, I was on the tour truck, and he was saying, we just put this, I think it was a long guy in the bag. And I was having a chat with him, and he said, yeah, put that in, he's going to hit it off this hole, this hole, this hole. And he said, and he'll win this week. And I said, all right, you think he'll win? He went, he will win this week. He said, there's no one will beat him. And he won. And it was just like, that wasn't him kind of finger in the air, I think he'll do well. It's like, I know this player so well. I know his game so well. I know where he hits it. I know the clubs I've got in the bag. He will win. And it just made me realise that, wow, these guys are so close to these players. They know everything about them. And I guess it is your job as a tour rep to be that way, isn't it? And I guess that's what separates you from everyone else, being that dedicated to your job.
I've called a couple of long shots before, just based on knowing them week in, week out, and knowing how they're hitting shots on the range and knowing where their headspace is at. I had one in Spain. So Richard Stern, he was on the bubble to keep his card in Europe. Little guy, South African guy, my height. I worked with him a lot, like golf shafts, really soft. And it was his first year on tour. He was young. And he came up to me. He hadn't done anything all year, like hardly been on the trucks. And it was going way back. Truck was like an open workshop, and you'd walk into it was a health and safety hazard back then. You'd walk into the truck. It was before your time at D, and it was like brutal. And the saws were going. He walked in, goes, hey, I need something. And I'm looking at this kid thinking, what the fuck? Like everyone is scrambling. Everyone's trying to keep their card. It's not a massive event. He going, what caps? Look at me, what caps? And I was like, what? You're like, what? And like the saws are going. I'm like, and he grabs me by the arm and he goes, I need white caps. And I was like, white caps. He says, I wanted to say TaylorMade on the front, and I want a new white cap. I was like, that's easy. I go, we've given you caps. Someone's put them in your locker. He goes, nah, you've given me blue, you've given me black, I want white caps. And I was like, right, okay. And he goes, well, do it now. And I was like, well, I'm freaking busy. Like, I'll get you some hats. I'll bring them out to the range. He goes, nah, you do it now. Because come Sunday, I'm going to be walking down this hole and I want a fresh white cap. And he goes, and do you know why? And I said, why? He goes, because I'm going to fucking win. I was like, mate, you're 150th on the money list. You're complete freaking bonkers. I don't give a shit. Like, here's all the white caps you got left on this. I'm not even going to be here next week because they ain't doing Q school. Take 7 white caps and wear one every day and give a couple to your caddy. I don't care. And he goes, you'll see. And next year you will be fucking helping me more than you've helped me this year. I went, all right, mate, see you later. And then next thing you knew, I was at every single major with this cocky little South African fella working with him every single week. What do you think it is? What do you think of that? I was like, yeah, mate. Let's go off the track, man. Let's go off of what we've got in front of us rather than you just standing there telling me you're going to win and you need a white kip, you fucking dick.
So were you working with him on his golf clubs or just his hatwear?
Oh, this guy started out with no understanding of golf clubs at all. And like, again, with someone like that, you have to educate them on what's available. Whereas other players like Goose have got so much understanding, Retief Goosen, and Garcia, so much understanding that they're educating you. Clarkie's not bad. Rosie's obviously phenomenal, but includes you in the process. Keimer's the same. Like, some of these players know everything and others know nothing. And you just, it's the emotion of the journey that you have to go on with these players. And I think one thing that's overlooked is it's not a 9 to 5. It's not a go in, say hello to the customer service birds, finance is over there. This thing is like, fly to this venue, stay there, live the job for 4 days, fly back, fly to the next venue, stay there, live the job, fly back. That is the tougher part of it. If you just pick yourself up and stick you on a different driving range every single week, no, I mean, Tuesdays are the best Tuesdays ever in that job. Tuesdays are the best. But look, it don't work like that. And to do that job, you've got to be prepared to sacrifice a lot, which I did. If you love golf, then you'll do all right, but you got to love it.
I know we're getting close to wrapping up, but I just want to ask Darryl one more question. This is my assumption from the outside looking in. Big tournaments, like majors, even the players like that. Are you quieter those weeks? Because surely those players are like, I'm not changing anything this week. Like, I'm set. Like, I need to be set the previous week. So do they tend to be quieter?
Yes. There's no easy way to say that. They've got their on form. They're playing well usually. The way the categories work, top 50 players in the world, a lot of them are going in form. So typically they're quieter weeks. But having said that, there will always be a group of players that will maybe adjust for the type of course that it is. So, for example, a lot of the American guys that might maybe come over for the Open Championship, they might be looking for stuff that's going to keep the ball lower, run the ball a bit more. So you end up doing more with sort of the longer irons or maybe hybrids, things like that. So it's not a case that you're looking for performance gains out of their actual overall game. You're being reactive to what the course needs the player to do, needs from the player in order to achieve success on the course. So therefore, you're building new equipment for them as opposed to really tweaking a few things over. You might do some regrips, or there might be like a loft and lie check.
Breakage.
Breakage. Yeah. Sometimes a cracked face, or, some guy's driver might get tested or whatever, and they just need a backup for whatever reason. So there's bits and pieces to do all week, but in terms of out and out, like repping the brand hard, it's a quieter week. Because it's a strategic week for the best players.
Well, I will let one of you two wrap this up, but before we do, I want to make a plea. Anybody who's out there, listen to this, who knows Tim Stevens, please reach out to him. Get him to email us.
We should get him on the show.
I'd love an email, but I'd even prefer him to be on the show. And I think for next season, we should actually look at swapping Trotty and Tim Stevens out. So Tim Stevens, if you're listening, you can do next season.
This podcast would never have happened if it wasn't for Tim Stevens. I would have won.
Exactly.
I'd have been Robert Rock.
Right.
Listen.
Close it out, Trotty.
Exactly. Being on tour and being successful at majors is much like that kid that used to stand next to you in the hallway to your exam room and was just about to start studying. If you don't know it on the Thursday of when you're going to play, then you ain't got it, son. You're failing this puppy. I'm sorry, but that's the way that goes. Anyway, folks, that was a good episode.
I've just got visions.
Go on, Bubsy.
Tim Stevens coming on the podcast just for 30 seconds and just coming on and going, Trotty couldn't put backspin on it, and that's it. He's out there.
Listen, we're going to wrap it there. I want a group. Spin friends, and we'll end it there. Come on, spin friends.
Spin friends.